Jim, thank you very much for joining us today. In August of 2008, Russia invaded Georgia. Many things have changed since then. Some things remain the same. What do you think has changed, and what do you see as the same continuation of the same events now?
Well, I think things have changed, at least in the West. After the invasion of Georgia, the West, the NATO allies, the United States didn't quite appreciate what had just happened. For whatever reason, whether it was the George W. Bush administration or it was the Obama administration, this absolute insult to the Western agreements about boundaries and how the European nations were going to deal with one another. This total taking asunder the way we all agreed to act among one another wasn't seen as something that merited a forceful response by the West towards what Russia did. So I think it has taken years, frankly, for us to wake up to the fact that Putin is not the person that we assumed he was beginning in 2000, and that Russia is going in a different direction. And so what has changed is certainly since 2022, when the second invasion of Ukraine happened. The last bitter enders who wanted to believe in Russia as being a part of Europe, it could be integrated into the European institutions. That was when the last people finally agreed that we were in a perilous situation. It took us many years to get there, and it made the time for us to prepare for this very short. A lot of time was wasted. So the change is really on the West and at NATO and in the United States. Not so much with Russia. They kept going from 2008 and they never stopped.
Do you think there are any lessons that the West learned after 2008 invasion of Georgia?
The lesson is that you can't pick and choose when you're going to react with force on something that has happened, like the invasion of Georgia. Not that the military is the solution for every incident, that the military hammer is the only tool in the toolbox, but there seem to be a lot of mistaken assumptions made about Russia, about what the Russian invasion of Georgia meant, and what the appropriate response was. That type of, as I said earlier, I described it as an insult. That type of insult to the international community it doesn't warrant sanctions or harsh words. It had to be something harder. And certainly there had to be preparations within the West to understand that the West was dealing with a different Russia. That the time of assimilating Russia, bringing Russia into Europe, making Russia a member of NATO, all these aspirations from the early 90s, which were legitimate, I think, after the end of the Cold War, that maybe this could happen, they were clung to for too long. And so the lesson is that no matter how bitter the pill is, you can't cling to something from the past like we did. It has only hurt us in the future to handle the situation we have now with Russia.
Do you think we're using that changed mindset as we look at the war in Ukraine?
Well, I think there's a couple things happening. One is certainly in the West and among NATO allies, we have embarked to try to improve our military capabilities. We've been showering Ukraine with assistance. And defense spending has jumped up for most countries. So I mean, there's some good things that happened, but there's a lot of wheel spinning as well, where certain things aren't done quickly enough, like providing certain types of assistance to Ukraine. The how we allow the defense industrial base, both in the United States as well as in Europe, to atrophy after the end of the Cold War, so that we can't surge the way we need to surge for our own protection. Work is being done to try to fix that, but that's going to take so many years. So I think lessons have been learned. Lessons are being applied. They're being applied not consistently among every country. They're being applied with the solutions being only a long-term solution, nothing that can be fixed quickly. So I think the lessons are there. Um, I don't think we're going to really be able to understand how well we've understood those lessons until the next crisis happens. And maybe we'll be better prepared at that point. But right now, it's a scramble. And where that's had some good components and some components that just are not fixed. And we'll just have to hope that we'll have time to get these things back in order before Russia decides to find another victim. But right now, we've got to provide the assistance to Ukraine to buy us that time to fix these problems, to learn these lessons.
Do you think Georgia can be a target or a victim of Russian military aggression again?
Well, I think internal to Georgia, as we know, there's political fighting over Georgia's future, and so if the pro Moscow camp seems to win the day and be inculcated into the Georgian government and this type of thing, it probably won't be the subject of a Russian military invasion, but certainly it will. Russia will have its influence and have its talons in Georgia, manipulating Georgian officials, manipulating Georgian society. So while they might not feel a military aggression, they will certainly feel the hot breath of Moscow breathing down their necks. So we'll have to see how the politics in Georgia goes for the long term, and it's a it's a perilous position for the Georgian people to be in. And I just wish they had been in NATO and the EU earlier on to be better positioned to handle this pressure from Russia. But right now they have been wounded by 2008, and it puts them not necessarily in a good position to handle the future.
Yeah. So right now it sounds like from what you're saying that they are between a rock and a hard place, really.
I think you could call it that, which is so unfair for Georgians. I'm just so sorry that has happened. I worked with Georgia and was very much part of the Partnership for Peace and all that we did to try to integrate Georgia into the West and the Western institutions. And it's just having this happen is a blow, not just to Georgia, but to the West, and a lesson to us not to just put on rose-colored glasses and think all things are going great.
Do you think there are any lasting geopolitical effects of that 2008 very short 5-day war to today's European context?
Absolutely. That's the reverberations and the ripples from 2008 bounces up and down every day because it was that invasion that gave Putin a better taste for how well his military could perform and how he might conduct his next act of aggression, which was the invasion of Crimea with his little green men. I think he learned from Georgia that he needed to have a different tactic. Um, I think also this idea of from the West, again, the lessons learned from Georgia that shaped the response in 2022. We didn't do what we did in 2014, which talked about sanctions and not lethal assistance and this type of thing. I think we saw this time around with the 2022 invasion that we needed to come in harder, lethally, and so those experiences from Georgia impacted how we responded to Russia, and it impacted how Putin shaped his next acts of aggression. So Georgia is all it's all part of the fall of the Soviet Union. The fall of the Soviet Union has rippled in many different directions, and unfortunately, a decade or so after the fall, Georgia was picked up in a new direction that the Russians had decided to go in after the end of the Cold War, and that was an aggressive one of trying to reconstitute themselves. And Georgia was the first target. And NATO and the United States, the West, we set that up, unfortunately. I think with good intentions, but we weren't. We did not have a good appreciation for what we were dealing with, and that that mistake is amplified and replicates itself in Ukraine and in other aspects of the Russian, European, U.S. relationship.
What do we need to do to avoid some of the consequences of the 2008 war, that the Russian invasion of Georgia? Now, when we're dealing with this conflict in Ukraine, where Russia invaded Ukraine again with a full scale invasion.
We have to provide Ukraine everything we possibly can for them to defend themselves, to push back the Russians, and to come up with some type of agreement that is a just agreement to end the fighting. When that will happen, I don't know. But what we cannot do now is to double down on the mistakes in 2008 and not treat Russia the way they should have been treated, and not provide assistance to Ukraine the way we should have been doing since 2008, if not before. So that's what we have to do. And finally, we have to make sure our own defense, the United States, the NATO allies, we have got to make sure we spare no expense to rebuild our deterrence and our military capability. We have to do that. It's hand in glove. If we don't do that, then we are just doubling down the mistakes made in 2008. We just are. And we've got to realize that. The publics have got to realize that. And I don't think they do.
Jim, is there anything else you would like to add?
Just how my heart breaks for Georgia. And I say that because I know what the aspirations and the potential were 20 years ago or so. And the West, NATO, U.S., we put a lot of effort into Georgia and into Ukraine. And to have this happen is infuriating. And we are at the very beginning of the long, drawn out struggle with the Russians. And I'm sorry that Georgia and Ukraine are caught right there. And the civilians in those two nations are bearing the cost for this. And I just wish one day we will see the end of this fighting. And Georgia and Ukraine brought into Western institutions the way it should have been 20 years ago.
If you liked this week's show, remember there's more where this came from. You can find extended interviews with the experts on the Cypher Brief's YouTube channel, as well as other social media platforms. And we invite you to visit our website at decipherbrief.com for your daily dose of national and global security news. I'm Iya Meormishvili. Thanks for watching. We'll see you back here next week.